Today we're going to take a look at the Sony FE 50mm 1.8 lens. I'm going to give you some insight into this lens. From there we'll take a look at some sample footage, some sample photographs, and at the end I'll give you a summary of my thoughts. Let's jump right into it. So here it is, and first things first, it's a pretty affordable lens. You're looking at about 3.5 grand South African or 250 US. Like I said, it's a 50mm lens, which gives you a really nice perspective. It's great for portraits if you're shooting photographs. You can use it for interviews if you're shooting video, and obviously a whole bunch of other applications, but that's typically where you'd find yourself using this lens. It is light. It comes in at about 168 grams, I think, which is great. It doesn't weigh down your bag when you're running around if you're out shooting. This lens is full frame compatible, which is fantastic. So you chuck it on a full frame camera and you're going to get those full 50mm. It does have built-in autofocus, which is a great advantage, and I'll show you how that performs a little bit later on. What's useful about this lens is it goes all the way down to an aperture of f1.8. Now that's really going to come in handy when you're shooting video or photo in low light situations. It also gives you that really cinematic look, gives you a nice shallow depth of field, creating a nice blurred out background with your focal point of the image being really sharp, which is a great quality to have in your images. So now let's jump into Lightroom and I'll show you a couple of shots I took earlier today. So we were outside on the balcony, it was nice and sunny, and I positioned my model in a way to get a nice triangle under her eye, which is that typical Rembrandt lighting effect. Just did some slight corrections on this image, so there you can see the before, there you can see the after. So not an intense edit, but very subtle, and I think it looks pretty good. Let's take a look at that sharpness. The image is pretty darn crisp. I'm pretty sure that was where I was focusing, and as you can see, a lot of sharpness over there. And this was that 1.8mm focal length. So what's beautiful about that, there you can see f1.8. Look at that blurred out background. Now I took another shot just to compare, and that is a f22. So that's what I'm talking about, that shallow depth of field that you're wanting to get. Creates a really nice cinematic effect. Let's pull these two up side by side. As you can see, the background is nice and blurred out over there, whereas in the next one the background, a lot of it is in focus. So I enjoy shooting at this focal length. It looks really good. If we take a look at the image, let's take a look at this one on the right hand side, and I want to see how sharp the image is across the board at f22. And if you ask me, I think it looks pretty good all across. Really no complaints there. One thing that this lens does have and that you need to be aware of is some pretty significant vignetting. So if we scroll down and then we enable the profile corrections that's built into Lightroom, doesn't look so intense there. I guess when I'm shooting at f22 it's not as apparent. However, when we're shooting at f1.8 it becomes very apparent. So you can see there's quite a big change, and that's entirely up to you whether you want it to have that darker edge around the border, that intense vignette, or not. I just want to make you guys aware of the fact that that exists. So overall I think the picture quality is pretty good. The autofocus was nice and fast, which I do enjoy. There's nothing worse than waiting to line up your shot and the camera is just breathing in and out and it can't find your focal point, your image. It focused in by itself nicely on the eye. So just a couple more examples. This is a bit more of a stylistic edit that I did on this image here. And again, so let's take a look at this eye where the focus would have been pulling towards, and it's pretty nice and sharp. Maybe not as sharp as what I would want it, and perhaps that wasn't precisely the focal point. You can see it's still loading there. It might clear up, maybe not, but I think that looks pretty darn sharp. It's a pretty good looking image. Yeah, there we go. Okay, see that load is over. That's pretty sharp. I'm really happy with that. Just in some other lighting conditions, these came out really nicely, and I think this is a great lens. I think it produces a really nice that focal length, that 50mm, that compression is really good for portraiture, and that's why I recommend shooting portraits using that 50mm. So I think it's going to be a pretty good purchase if you go that route. Alright, onto using this lens to shoot video. Now, like I said, it's a really nice focal length, so if you're wanting to shoot interviews, it works really well. If you're wanting to shoot just general run and gun style stuff on video, it might be a little bit tight for you at 50mm, but the compression that you get out of it creates pretty true to life imagery in terms of the compression that happens within your eye. So it's going to be a really pleasing image to look at right off the bat. This lens, however, doesn't have built-in stabilization. You do have a version with built-in stabilization that is slightly more expensive. But if you've got in-body image stabilization in your camera or you're shooting off of a gimbal, I really don't think this is going to be a problem for you. To test the autofocus of this lens in video mode as well, I ran two different scenarios. The first one being a nicely well-lit scene, the second one being slightly darker. I was quite impressed by the performance of the lens. I do think it performed better in a well-lit scene as opposed to that darker scene, but I'll let you be the judge. So far, this lens is performing really well. I am now going to highlight some of the features that I don't quite enjoy. Number one, the autofocus can be pretty noisy. When you're shooting video, I thought I was going to notice it more. However, there was quite a smooth racking of focus, so it wasn't a complete deal breaker. When you're shooting photos, it does get quite noisy, but I guess that really doesn't matter. I just want you to be aware of that the autofocus on the lens can be pretty noisy. Next up, and still on the autofocus front, this lens doesn't have one of those built-in switches like many lenses do to switch from manual focus to autofocus. So you're going to have to be doing that in camera. Again, not a deal breaker. Now onto the build quality of the lens. It looks aesthetically quite pleasing. I don't know how premium the materials are. It feels kind of light. I wouldn't want to drop it. I wouldn't want to drop any lens, but I feel like this one would probably take a little bit more damage. So what are my thoughts on this lens? I think everybody should have one. They call it a nifty 50 for a reason. It's an inexpensive, super versatile lens. Like I said, you get what you pay for. It doesn't have all of the greatest built-in features. You don't have that toggle or autofocus to manual focus on the body itself. Sometimes the autofocus isn't ideal in terms of it's kind of loud now and then. It can be found racking for focus in lower light conditions. But for the money, I think it's a really good investment, and I think it's something you should add to your kit. So I have shot some more extensive test footage on this lens, and I'll be releasing it in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. If you found this video helpful at all, give it a like, consider subscribing to this channel. Let me know what your favorite lens is and whether or not you shoot on one of these nifty 50s. I'll see you guys next time.